So our group was assigned the sociological approach. So with a focus on social justice, how can we explain the difference in educational outcomes across different groups? By focusing on social justice, it's impossible to not acknowledge the historic and entrenched imbalance of power and status. We'll be honing into how this imbalance presents itself in disparate educational outcomes in terms of ethnicity, class, and gender. Some of society's most challenging obstacles arise from that imbalance of power and status, the conflict between the majority and the minority. Minorities have become synonymous with low power and status. What are the effects of entering a threatening environment, for instance, where somebody's cultural identity is stigmatized? Predictably, academic performance alongside motivation and self-perception deteriorates in response to exclusion and discrimination. This model illustrates how minorities, aka targets of prejudice, how their academic outcomes and institutional trust is cyclically undermined. Regardless of how passive a threatening environment may first appear, the seepage of social exclusion and devaluation can lead to much more than just low attainment. For example, stereotype threat. That's the risk of reinforcing a negative stereotype about your own group. There's social identity threat, which is the paralyzing uncertainty that comes with vigilantly looking out for cues that forebode a threatening environment. Attributional ambiguity is the doubt that stems from whether the judgment someone is receiving is due to prejudice or their own personal doing. And finally, institutional distrust is where past experiences within threatening environments can impact their future perceptions of the minority's ability to succeed within said environment. One of the most dire coping strategies when minorities are faced with such threats is disengagement and disidentification. This is where individuals detract how much self-esteem is invested into a specific area. Disidentification is seen as particularly counterproductive because reducing identification with academic achievement is very likely to also reduce learning and effort.
Lawson and Garrod defined ethnic groups as people who share common history, customs, and identity, as well as, in most cases, language and religion, and who see themselves as a distinct unit. This goes to show that people that belong to ethnic minority backgrounds tend to stay amongst themselves and form their own communities. Statistically, Asian students tend to perform better academically compared to other ethnic groups, whilst Black students tend to underachieve. This demonstrates how ethnicity and race play a large role in our academic careers and can affect just how successful we are. Despite this, government statistics emphasize how white working class students often perform similarly or worse than other ethnic minority groups. This implies that social class can also significantly affect our education. Disparities between ethnic groups and their academia performance can be due to both internal and external factors. An internal reason being labeling. So Black students are often seen in a negative light, for example, them being disruptive. Gilborn found that teachers were quicker to discipline Black students as they perceived their behavior as threatening. Consequently, those students feel underestimated and picked on. This was due to racial stereotypes that teachers held rather than students' actual behavior. Another internal reason being peer groups. So students that are labeled usually form a subculture amongst their peers. Within the group, there will be a shared set of values and ideologies. For example, a group of Black students could form an anti-school subculture that is maintained between friends. An external reason could be attitudes and values. Charles Murray strongly advocates that some Black peoples are socialized into a subculture that instills a live for today attitude that doesn't value education. In comparison, Asian students tend to come from families that see education in a much more positive light and raise them to prioritize theirs as well as encouraging them to do well. This can be a reason as to why they perform so differently in school. Another issue could be material deprivation. Ethnic minority groups are more likely to suffer from material deprivation. Flaherty describes how unemployment is 3 times higher for African, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi families. As a result of this, they can't afford to live in areas that provide good opportunities and would have to live in poor areas. This means that they'd have to attend poorer schools due to their catchment area. Consequently, these schools would have a lack of resources and materials, for example, computers and textbooks.
Next, we're going to talk about the differences in educational outcomes across different classes. And we're going to look at Bourdieu, who suggested that cultural and material factors can contribute to achievement and success in education. He suggested that there were 4 different capitals that can influence educational outcomes between different socioeconomic groups. The first being economic, which refers to how much money a certain person or family has. The middle class may be doing better because they have more money and they can afford things such as private school, which can cost between £14,000 and £32,000 a year, private and extra tutoring, which can cost between £30 and £60 an hour, and have more and better resources available at home, such as the newest laptops and more textbooks than other students. The next capital is social, which refers to relationships and networks, and suggests that the middle class may be doing better because they have access to more resources because of their relationships with other middle class families or organisations, clubs, societies, voluntary associations, and political parties. This could be because meeting people from different professions and backgrounds who have access to a range of different resources because of that profession. The next capital is symbolic, meaning the middle class may be doing better due to the honour, prestige and recognition of themselves and their family through trophies, awards and diplomas. This could mean that they may be more likely to be accepted into different clubs or societies. The last capital is cultural and suggests that the middle class attitudes may also influence why they are doing better in school. For example, more middle class parents went to university than working class parents, which could mean they value education more highly, and then they relay these values onto their children by encouraging them and sometimes pressuring them to do well academically. This can also be shown through the activities parents choose to do with their children, such as educational trips to museums and galleries may give younger children a head start when they go to school.
Okay, so now we move on to the working class. So first of all, I think we can all agree that the working class is less privileged in terms of education as compared to other social classes. First of all, kids on free school meals are 20% less likely to achieve 5 or more GCSEs at A-stars to say, including English and maths. 4/5 of children from working class minority ethnic families are taught in schools with higher concentration of other immigrants or disadvantaged students. And students in the more working class comprehensives get less money per head and less qualified teachers. And when in the same schools as middle class kids, they get lower sets. Research suggests it is the wealth and inclination of parents rather than the ability and efforts of the child that have the most influence on a child's educational success today. Working class families are said to lack books and toys that would stimulate a child's intellectual development. Thus, children begin schools without the skills needed to progress. The parents are also less ambitious for their children and take less interest in their education, and as a result, the children have less motivation towards school. The values of lower class reflect a self-imposed barrier to educational success. They believe they have less chance of achieving individual success and senior point education as a result. According to Sugarman, the working class subculture has 4 key features that act as a barrier to educational achievement. Fatalism, I believe in fate and there's nothing you can do to change the status. Private school students are 55 times more likely than children receiving free school meals to gain a place at the University of Oxford or Cambridge. Around 18% of English school educational spending currently goes on the 7% of pupils who are privately educated, which means they spend more on the private school systems per child than any other country. Also, in fairness and higher achieving state education systems such as those in Canada, Finland, and Japan, children who are falling behind receive extra support and more small group input to enable them to catch up. While in England, the educational system, it is the white middle class children with assertive parents who are more likely to receive extra help and additional resources. So it's unsurprising that the socioeconomic attainment gaps widen. And this is how the English education system has always worked, but it doesn't stop it from being unjust.
I'm going to talk about the difference in educational outcome across gender. Girls have always outperformed boys at every stage of the education system, and there are many reasons for this. One of them being the cultural changes and changes to the labour market. This includes availability of contraception and abortion, which opens up the opportunities and job market. There's more motives for women to do better in education as they no longer have to choose between family, children and their job. Another factor is changes in female primary socialization, meaning that there's far more parental involvement and more help with homework, etc., helping girls to develop their skills earlier on. Also, positive labeling for girls. Girls are often labeled as high achievers by teachers, This can lead to self-actualization as they like this label and they keep working hard and they then become high achievers. In terms of boys, they have underachieved in the education system compared to girls. You can see this on the chart. A reason for this is hypermasculinity. This is a term that James and Maia used. This is an exaggerated form of masculinity emphasized by things like physical strength and aggressiveness. This often leads to boys believing that education is irrelevant for their path in life. This leads on to negative labels. Platten believed that traditional male behaviour has been reinterpreted negatively by teachers, leading to boys being labelled as things like underachievers and lazy, also leading to self-actualization. Barbara identified 3 main male underachiever subcultures. These include disappointed boys, who are boys who can't do much at school without their peer group, disaffected boys, boys who dislike school and use it to show off their bad behaviour, and disappeared boys, boys who attend school as little as possible. However, despite this, in 2019, 62.9% of boys were awarded a C or grade 4 or higher at GCSE level.
So having looked at this through a sociological lens, we can explain such disparate educational outcomes with such power and status imbalances that directly impact things like educational attainment, health, access to resources, housing, and employment. We can take steps to circumvent impaired academic performance through things like evaluative tests, group work, or simply openly acknowledging social identity threat. But perhaps to narrow unfair educational differences sustainably, we need to ask ourselves how to achieve lasting social justice, a question beyond the breadth of this presentation.